Mexico Tech study. I think there's some confusion about it, and did I just say study? I did, I shouldn't have. But it is an assessment, and at this point, it's easy to make mistakes. So, Director Springfield, would you please?
I do, Mr. Chairman, because I think maybe some information that was related to Commissioner Rhodes was a little either exaggerated or not correct. And I say that only because I'm a person that's been dealing with New Mexico Tech, and I helped write this scope of work. So I'd like to at least read into the record the scope of work and what it is they're doing. Key geologic parameters will be mapped across the county. Parameters will be evaluated, including identification of stratigraphic.
Mike, can I stop you just for a second?
Yes, sir.
Is this the July 16 document, or
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you also going to address the July 17th
This is
document?
the July 17th.
That is?
Yes, sir.
And that's where we pay them to go talk to Thrust Energy? You have that on there, right?
No, sir. That's not what, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to read
Go ahead,
into the
sir.
record. Identification of stratigraphic units, formations that have oil and gas potential, lithology and types of reservoirs, hydrocarbon shows encountered by previous exploratory drilling, petroleum source rock parameters and distribution, areas of current and historical production, and areas that have the potential for future oil and natural gas production, which will be mapped by stratigraphic unit. Mapping of potential productive strata will allow assessment of the depth to potentially productive reservoirs across the county. Pertinent aspects of aquifers will also be mapped in a reconnaissance manner, including the distribution of aquifers prevalent in the county and the depth to the base of the aquifer interval. This, in conjunction with the projected depth to potentially productive oil and gas reservoir, will allow the assessment of the effect of oil and natural gas production on aquifers. Also evaluated in this regard will be the effect of modern drilling technologies on both oil and natural gas production and on aquifers. If I may, Mr. Chairman, just real quick, I think there's a misunderstanding here. And of course it goes to the whole exercise of what it is we're doing here. This is a zoning ordinance amendment. It is a land use amendment. In and of itself, it assumes the resource is there. It just does. It assumes the resource is there. And so from a land use point of view, if the resource is there, and if somebody goes out to extract that resource, what are the land use requirements that we're going to put on them in order to do that activity? So again, we can talk about preemptions and all of that. We've gone through all of that. But I just think there's some confusion. I wanted to read that into the record.
I appreciate that, Director Springfield, because I would agree with you too. I think as we've worked on this ordinance for all this time, there's this misconception that the county statutorily can do things that we simply can't do. We don't have the authority, nor do we have the staff, nor do we have the budget to create an EPA office here at Sandoval County. So we're reliant on these other industries, and this is a point I think that needs to be made. Yeah, we're relying on these other agencies to do their jobs. And they've been doing it for a long, long time. Just consider that here we are sitting here in Sandoval County. It's 2017, and you've had oil and gas exploration and production in Sandoval County for decades, and there's been no ordinance. There's been no ordinance. And so, you know, what we're trying to do is pass an ordinance in an area statutorily where we can. And that's exactly what this ordinance is. So I know there's plenty of people in the room that would like us to legislate the industry out of Sandoval County. And that represents one of the other issues that we've faced as a commission trying to craft an ordinance, is the fact that the industry was already here. So it's a challenge that, you know, has been tough to deal with in crafting an ordinance. And so when you try to understand why we can't pass, you know, a law that says, hey, you can't frack, or you can't do this, or you can't do that. The reason why is we don't have the statutory authority to regulate that. So, and when you talk about water, that's regulated by the state of New Mexico. And I'm sure there's few of you would tell me, just like a few minutes ago when I was told, well, Santa Fe has an ordinance that doesn't allow anything. Well, Santa Fe County doesn't have any oil and gas operations either. So, but they gladly take that check when it comes in from the oil and gas industry. So, I mean, I don't want to talk about hypocrisy, but, you know, it's one thing to have a 900-page ordinance that excludes the industry, and you know, it's a good thing for Santa Fe County, but for Sandoval County, our problem is the industry's been here for decades. So I'm not sure if any of you knew that, but now you do. So let's move on.
So
we're going to do public comment.
Comments. And I'd like to read this
Commissioner
again,
Holden Rhodes.
and hopefully it'll go into the record. And this is from a week ago, Monday, from the people that are doing the study or the assessment, and I'm not sure which one we're working on, but I'm quoting here, New Mexico Tech does not have the time, finances, or individual resources to do a thorough assessment of aquifers or unconventional drilling operations, parents, horizontal drilling and fracking. Therefore, the scientific staff is concentrating nearly all of its efforts into the primary mandate, which is evaluation of oil and gas potential. And that's from the horse's mouth. I rest my case.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yeah, Commissioner Black, go
If I
ahead.
could just have Mr. Springfield back real quick.
Sure.
I just want to talk about that document. So I have the PSA document, Mr. Springfield.
Yes.
That was entered into the record by our fine county clerk over there. Good job. On the, looks like the 28th of July of 2016. And this has the scope of work that we discussed. I think it was last meeting when I read word for word the various, I think the 8 things that were in the scope of work related to the professional services agreement. I'm sure you remember that, correct?
Yes, sir.
The document you're looking at, what was the date of that document?
Well, it was recorded 2016, July of 2016.
What was the July of 2017 document? I thought I heard you say that.
That's the work order.
The work order. So that work order, was it a purchase order or was it a work order?
It's a work order.
And what was on that work order?
The scope of work and what it is they're supposed to do and how much it costs.
How much was the cost?
$62,000. $62,009.07.
So did we go through New Mexico Tech on that purchase order related to the scope of work through the PSA agreement? Can I assume that?
Yes, sir.
So if we did that and it cost $62,000, this was, it should have gone through the procurement process, correct? It was probably not an RFP, but it was probably, was it an invitation to bid?
It's government, you don't have to do that.
Okay, how many, and it was over 62, it was over 60,000?
Yes.
So if it's over 60,000, according to the county and the procurement rules that are governed by, I want to make sure I have this for our county attorney, General Services Department, State Purchasing Division 1.4.1.1 NMAC, -RP 1.4.1.1 NMAC 08-30-13. And in the county, what I've been briefed is, and I'm okay going government to government, is that anything over 60,000 requires Board of County Commission approval. And I'm trying to figure out if this was July of 17, I don't remember voting for it, I may have missed it. I would ask my other county commissioners that, but if that was in July, I'm gonna go back and just double check here, just so I'm thorough. And I wanna make sure, I might be mistaken that this was on the agenda in July.
It was the previous year. We go by the county commission approved contract. We bring the contract, the professional services contract to the county commission approves that professional service contract.
Okay.
Under that professional services contract, staff is allowed to do work orders.
Got it? So.
And because it's government to government, the $60,000 rule does not apply as I've been briefed.
So we as county commissioners aren't aware of the purchase order for $62,000?
The money was approved through the budget process. It was explained to the county manager
In 2016.
in 2016.
Right, in 2016.
The work session that we had in May of this year, the assessment was explained to the county commission, and the funds were approved by the county commission.
3 pages.
So, yeah, I mean, I wasn't here in July 2016.
Correct.
I understand the scope of work, but I'm just trying to remember if we even voted on this as a commission, or was this just included in the budget?
It's included in the budget.
So we had no, we voted on the budget
Correct.
as a whole. I get
Correct.
that. I mean, we're not gonna go line item by line item.
Correct.
So it was not on any of the commission agendas to actually approve the $62,000 purchase order, is that correct?
Well, we do it exactly as the process is in the county. The professional service agreement is brought to the county commission for approval.
Gotcha. Yeah,
Money
that was in
is-
July 16.
Money is budgeted.
Got it.
We
Per the
advise.
statement of work, those 8 things,
Correct.
right? Okay.
The discussion about the study was done at the work session in May, and I can't remember what the final vote was. I think the final vote on the budget was in June.
Yeah, we voted
Of
on the
this
budget.
year.
We voted on the budget in June of this year.
And the county manager at that time included the funds into the budget, and I can't explain any further than that.
Now, I just, when I go through the procurement brief, because I've asked about the procurement process in the county related to contracts and so forth, I was never told in the procurement process about a government-to-government transfer for services, so to
Correct.
speak.
Correct.
And I thought we had to vote on that, and I just,
I can assure you that the purchase order, the request for funding the assessment had to go through finance, and it was reviewed by the
Yeah.
procurement officer, and, I mean, I rely on them too.
I mean, I had an in-depth briefing with, what time is it here, at 10:30, geez. Cassandra Herrera, and we talked about all the contract stuff, but I was never once told about a government-to-government transfer of funds for services. And I don't know if my other commissioners knew that was the process. I assumed that anything over 60K had to be voted by the commission.
Chairman, Commissioner May, can I clarify something?
Sure.
I think the professional services agreement was brought to the commission, it
Correct.
sounded like. That's what gets approved by the commission.
Got it.
The actual purchase order or work order in this case, that's an internal process. Those don't get approved by the commission ever, I don't
None
believe.
that I know of, and they're done all over the county.
Yeah, I did not know that because I was
And
not
I-
briefed that.
And I would tell you, I cannot tell you exactly when this has been posted, but this has been posted on the internet now for months.
I'm just
So
curious.
the
if-
public could review it.
No, I hear you. Did Vice Chair Heil, did you know that was the process? Did you know Commissioner Reichwald?
No, I have a copy of what was given to me from Planning and Zoning on Monday, and it's 2 different, there's a professional service agreement, and then there's a work order, or seemed like, but seems some of the stuff changed scope of work is a little bit different. And also it indicates on the time frame as to when it's supposed to start and when it was supposed to end is July 1st of 2017 and ending in May 11th of 2018.
Correct.
But how come we have,
This started in
2016? And
2016.
Yeah, it was
Yes.
that bunch of commissioners before us, they're the ones that did it.
so
That's the
I'm looking at
professional
all
services
this.
agreement.
Pardon me?
That's the professional service agreement was done, the commission before you.
That's correct. But then the work order was done almost a year after.
Correct.
How come it took so long?
Because
Because we had a meeting in May. We had a meeting in May with New Mexico Tech. Shouldn't they have already they were already giving us information. Shouldn't that?
no, this is just the process that it's taken us to get here. We didn't even get to start talking to New Mexico Tech about doing this study until like January of 2017. This has been a whole process that's been going on, and that's when we got to it. And we couldn't do it until later in 2007, in July, because of the closeout of the books and when you get to start using new money that's been approved through the budget. That's how the process works.
Yeah, I think just some of the confusion, Mr.
No, I
Springfield, was
understand.
related to what I was briefed on how we, contract out or provide services or ask for services. Anything over 60K, we assumed we would have been notified or voted on that, because I went back and checked in the agendas, and I couldn't find it, so I wanted to make sure the rules were followed,
Yes, sir.
which is extremely important, to make sure everything is transparent and it's tight.
I can assure you, you probably will not find another work order on the internet.
I mean, do you have anything else down there with that? I just didn't have the visibility into it, and I wanted to make sure it followed the correct process.
Yes, sir.
Because it didn't follow the process I was briefed.
The private sector is totally different. Government to government is totally different.
Okay.
One last question. There's on this work order. There's travel to Roswell date for talking with Jim Manat of Trust Energy. From I guess I don't know who created that work order and where it was done, but there's about $313.20. It's not a substantial amount, but it still indicates somebody that has been advocating for the oil and gas industry.
Just the opposite, Commissioner. What I've been told, and as I understand it, is that New Mexico Tech requested of this company information that they have to help them do the study. Just the opposite.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
My understanding is that New Mexico Tech has requested from Thrust Energy their information to be used in the assessments.
Okay.
They're using oil industry data. They're the only ones who have the data.
That's where it comes from.
They're the only ones that have the data, is the oil industry. It's recorded at New Mexico Tech. They use that information to do assessments just like this.
Is that the only company that New Mexico Tech goes through, or do they go through other?
I would have to find that out for
other,
you,
like
Commissioner.
Namoga or another type of oil?
I would have to find out. I know they're using some Shell data. I know they're using the Shell
So
data
it's common to
because
use
that's,
private industry data for oil and gas studies.
if I'm not mistaken, it's a state law that the oil industry has to give a certain amount of data to New Mexico Tech. What's the requirement?
Why don't we have Mr. Suazo come up and he can explain the data, where it came from, how we're getting it.
So you all want, more and more data, more and better data. And so the issue is that my client happens to possess some of this data. And he's been very clear about his willingness to share that data so that people can better understand the nature of the geology and what's there. Any way that he can be helpful to the county, to New Mexico Tech, he's willing to work with everybody, which I think has been demonstrated, time and time again over the past 2 years. So yes, it's impossible for any institution like the Mexico Tech to have all the data. So they're reliant upon people who've actually spent the money and the resources to acquire that data. So my understanding is that trip was put into that document as a means to pay for New Mexico Tech to go talk to my client so that they could discuss the information that he possesses.
Are they maps, or what type of data was New Mexico Tech looking for exactly?
I don't know the nature of the data. I mean, there's volumes of data that my client has that they use to study in the process of doing the due diligence. He's acquired over the course of the last 5 or 6 years that, Thrust Energy has been researching this particular area. So I don't know what data he has, but obviously he spent the time and the resources to acquire it, and so he's glad to share, portions of it if that helps everybody to understand what we're looking at.
Has he been approached before by New Mexico Tech to look
I
at the
don't know if he's
data?
been approached before.
Or by maybe other oil companies in private industry?
I don't know.
Okay. All right, thank you, sir.
Okay, thanks Director Springfield, thank you Mr. Suazo. Let's move on, we've got more public comment. I would like to call upon the Honorable Governor of the Pueblo of San Felipe, Governor Anthony Ortiz.
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here, and I'm no different person than I was here before, and I've been before you, Commissioners, numerous times. And I have a position letter here. There are 12 pueblos and tribes in Sandoval County, and there is only one country, other country in the United States with more tribes, San Diego County in California with 18. It is unfortunate then that the Sandoval County Commission had forgotten the tribes in their county when conceiving and drafting an oil and gas ordinance. There was no outreach or communication from the current or former commission to tribal leadership in this ordinance. And it is being said that this ordinance will not affect pueblos and tribes, which is grossly inaccurate and misinformed statement. We have been here from time immemorial, and we will be here far into the future. You cannot step on a piece of land or view a horizon that is not known us, to the people of indigenous to here. We are absolutely certain that the Sandoval County Commission and authors of this ordinance do not respect the boundaries and sovereignty of the pueblos and tribes or understand the complexity of Indian land trust status and Indian law within the county. We do not believe the Commission has the authority it may believe it has within Indian country, which Algodones, Angostura, and many other communities in the county are within, as defined by United States Code. Further, we do not believe the county understands the Pueblo Lands Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, or the National Historic Preservation Act, as they apply to Indian country, or it would not have attempted to pass the ordinance as it is written today. We thank the three commissioners who have to date met with representatives from the Pueblos and tribes within the county over the last 2 months. We're here, have heard our objections and learned how much you have learned about Pueblos and tribes and our knowledge of the use of land and natural resources. It is unacceptable then that the county commission will consider going forward with this proposed ordinance today. We have heard time and again, let it pass now and it will be amended later. We strongly reject that suggestion and urgently request the ordinance be tabled until such time the county performs adequate tribal consultation and amends ordinance to fix the deficiencies, inconsistencies, and omissions within. The Pueblos within Sandoval County are prepared to work with the county commission in the new year to save both time and taxpayers' funds to see that defensible oil and gas ordinance, which allows for thoughtful economic development in a way that protects our priceless water. culture, and natural resources within the county. It is developed and implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Governor. Thank you. Regis Pecos.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and honorable members of the commission. I'm Regis Pecos. I'm the former governor from Cochiti, but I come not in that capacity. I have spent 16 years in the executive and state government, and the last 15 years as part of legislative staff. I'm the former chief of staff to the speaker, and I currently serve as a senior policy advisor in the office of the majority. But I am not here in that official capacity. I'm here as an individual who has spent 30 years engaged in policy making where policy has been absent. I've been engaged in statutory construction, one to be inclusive of all governments vested with concerns, building mutual interest approaches for deriving mutual beneficial outcomes. I just want to provide a context. In 2007, the United Nations adopted what is called the Declaration of Indigenous Rights to redress the atrocious actions caused by development on indigenous peoples throughout the world that the United Nations has defined as the worst crimes against humanity. The United States is a signatory to that declaration. The United States, over the years, Democrats and Republicans alike have articulated and delineated provisions for genuine consultation. Presidents of the United States have issued executive orders so that federal agencies across the full spectrum could adhere to the kinds of genuine consultation for any kind of proposed activity to comprehensively measure the impacts. The state of New Mexico has taken those policies, laws, and the statutory framework to create its own policies to strengthen state and tribal relations. It has used that framework to create the statutory construction that now includes tribal governments, sovereign nations as part of that larger governmental framework. Just recently, in 2016, the New Mexico Association of Counties, and I want to express my appreciation for your leadership, Commissioner Eichwald, as part of the committee that has been engaged in looking at how the New Mexico Association of Counties can develop a similar process of engagement, of genuine government-to-government relations. Mr. Chairman, you alluded to the fact that the county does not have the resources in these kinds of very complex issues to fully assess the breadth and the scope of the impact. I believe that in all of the work at the international level, the national level, the state level, that as governments at this level, you would be pushing against the grain to be inconsistent with the evolution of the framework and policies that creates for the inclusion of sovereign nations in a process with other governments to fully engage in the collective assessment so that moving forward, any kind of decisions, in this case, the kind of decisions with the complexity of issues in a county like ours, with all of the unknowns to date, with the best available information, that I believe at this point that it only be prudent for you, one, to table this matter, buy some time, and as we move forward through the kinds of interventions with regard to kind of engagement of commissioners from throughout New Mexico that is part of the agenda that is formally approved by the New Mexico Association of Counties, what we do to create the kind of framework that provides for a genuine process and procedures delineated where you really elevate the respect of the relationship of the principles of government to government engagement. And I believe that moving forward in this manner would only, one, be exemplified with the kind of action that, Mr. Chairman, you alluded to appreciate the kind of engagement that you had with the representatives of the sovereign nations in this county. One, to appreciate the depth and the scope of their articulation with regard to the meaningful nature of that kind of engagement on the part of government. So I would ask at this point that there is no compelling need to rush into development with all of the unknowns, but it would only be prudent and genuine to table this so that moving forward you could engage the sovereign nations in a way that it would be meaningful, that elevates the integrity of this commission in ways that the citizens of this county can have the full trust and confidence in your actions. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much.
I wanted to reach out to Mr. Paisano. I didn't know if he wanted to speak or not. I see he's here tonight.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm not prepared to speak on behalf of the global set yet. I was asked to attend the meeting at a very late notice, so I'll pass at this particular time, and our governor will submit his comments. I think he did on Monday through our lieutenant governor, but in the future coming meetings. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir.
But we do oppose the ordinance moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Craig Barth.
I can't use a speaker, so we'll just do this the old-fashioned way.
How can you
And
can't
won't
sit down and
pick
use
you
a
up.
speaker?
I have electromagnetic sensitivity, so I can't be anywhere near with that microphone.
Speak loudly, though.
Okay, I'll speak as loud as I can. I'm Craig Barth. I'm from Cochise Lake. I spoke here 2 months ago. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I'm here to tell you a story. I'm going to bring this down to a personal level. It has to do with my father, Colonel Bert Barth. The story relates directly with the issues at hand tonight. And so, but first, to make the story meaningful, I have to digress and tell you a little bit of the background about my dad. For as long as I know, I've looked up to my dad. He was a pacifist as a young man, an idealistic pacifist. And in the late 1930s, he advocated that America should avoid fighting in any European war. Pearl Harbor ended all that, as you know. And when he learned a year or so later about the Nazi Germany atrocities being perpetrated on European Jews and all those who objected to Nazism, it pushed him over the edge. He drew a line in the sand and vowed to do everything he could to defeat Nazi Germany. He joined up in the spring of 1942. After the war, he joined the Army Reserves in 1946. He realized, though, that the war wasn't really won until Nazism was totally eradicated from German society. And having realized that, he worked for the DoD in Frankfurt from 1947 until 1953, specifically directed toward the denazification of German society. In 1953, he returned to Ohio, and in the late 1950s, he began his investment in the oil and gas business, principally with startups and with independents. He made a lot of money doing that. Now, you may not realize this being out in the West, but Ohio has been one of the leading producers of natural gas, supplying the Midwest, all the states around Ohio. Now, as you also know, hydraulic fracturing technology came into widespread use in the late 1990s. By 2005, my father had become aware of the environmental and personal devastation that can be caused by fracking. This is an investor with a conscience. And with the will and the integrity to do something about it. My father was, above all, a man of integrity and honor. That's where life started. He investigated what was happening with his companies and with fracking. And he was haunted by his complicity in the damage caused by fracking. Once again, he drew another line in the sand. This time he divested in his holdings in companies involved in fracking and dedicated the remaining years of his life to joining Food and Water Watch's efforts in lobbying against fracking. Anyone who knew my dad, when they saw him coming, knew what he was going to tell them. It was all about fracking. He died last fall at the age of 97. If he were here tonight, he would urge you to draft a new ordinance that prohibits fracking in all populated areas, fracking anywhere near an aquifer, and fracking anywhere near a sacred archaeological site. I want to thank you, Dad, for the example you set for me for moral leadership. The greatest thing anyone has ever said about me is that I am my father's son. So thank you, Dad.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Veronica Toledo. All right, moving on to Rowan Alka. Mark Mole.
Excuse me, Veronica Toledo, she left her words here. I would like to submit them by proxy.
Come on up and read them into the record.
My name is Ajani Yepa Spray. I am from the Bible Payments, and I will be submitting Veronica Toledo's comments. She is the current reigning powwow princess for the Santa Fe Indian School, and she has school tomorrow, so she had to get home, and I will be reading her comments here. I stand with Mother Earth to give you a sense of moral knowledge that relates to common sense. When do you plan on installing these pipelines? Do you question or care where the end is? You are killing the most powerful resources of the earth, the land, and the creatures of Mother Earth. The two-legged are being killed with a minimum of 7 people deciding if it's beneficial to the people and the land. No, it is not. You will be messing up the people and the land in many ways. We will be harmed. Oil in our blood. It's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to be in the soil. It's supposed to be in the soil where it belongs. Many oral stories are told to keep the blood or the oil in the earth. You will wake up a great disastrous effect on Mother Earth. A black snake will rise to overcome Mother Earth. The day you hear that the fracking pipelines burst, you cannot undo the decision that you made. You are on Native American land. Have you asked any Native person how this affects their land? This land is not for sale, nor is it a way to extract her blood. Don't be a follower. The people don't need another decision made for what's right or wrong. Veronica Toledo.
What did we work out with Louis Jacobs? What did we work out, Louis?
Mr. Chairman, as we spoke earlier,
Yeah.
I believe I had your approval to show the slideshow.
Yeah, I understand we have a technical challenge trying to get that done, so.
With all due respect, as I understand, it's ready to play. We just need to.
If it is, then we're good to go, is it?
He made it work.
Oh,
Yeah, we
okay.
got it to
All
work.
right, good.
With respect, I know it's getting late. I'd like to allocate the use of my mom Ruth's time.
Yeah, we discussed that before the meeting
Yes, sir.
tonight, and I said you'd be okay, so.
And it is 5 minutes and 33 seconds
Right.
precisely.
You're taking 2 people's time to show this video.
It's been agreed upon. She put a lot of work into it as well.
Your mom did it?
Well, she's very involved in our community. As,
I'm proud of her if she's
And were
working
you
with
telling me
a
that
computer
your
like
mom
that.
did this video or PowerPoint presentation?
No, I am not saying that.
I am saying she is an associate editor as a member of the community.
Oh, okay.
So who wrote the presentation?
I did. And
Your mom did do it.
No.
That would have been more impressive.
Very impressive. And I would certainly give her the credit if she had.
This was unintentional. Go ahead.
Here it is. It's just, if we have the music, we should be good to
Let it
go.
rip.
Thank you.
All my relations come, every nation come. All my relations under the sun. We are one. We are praying, come. We are praying, come. We are the song and we are the drum. We are one. We are the river, come. We are the river, come. We are the boat, the paddle, the shore. We are one. And you show me sing. And you show me sing. And you show me water is life for everything. Oh yes, we are the water sing. We are the water sing. We are the water. We are where all the life begins. Oh yes, we are the ancient one. We are the ancient one. In your breath and bones we sing on. We are one. We are the meadow come. We are the meadow come. We are the lark that sings. A new day has begun. We are the new day, run, run, run. We are the old and we are the young. We are one. And you would show me sing. And you would show me sing. And you would show me water is life for everything. Oh yes, we are the water sing. We are the water sing. We are the water. We are where all life begins. Oh yes, we are the earth and sky. We are the thunder cries. We are the fire. We are the light in your eyes. We are standing strong, like a rock, like a stone, on the sacred ground we belong. We are home. All my relations come, every nation come. All my relations under the sun. We are one.
We are human beings living and breathing. We ask you kindly to protect our land, not for our sake, but for generations to come. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lewis.
Mr. Lewis, that was a fantastic video that your mom did. The only thing I didn't like about it was the guy in the Giants jersey, but beautiful, beautiful video, beautiful people, beautiful music. Thank you for showing us that. Very good.
All right, Reyes DeVore.
Sayama, ni washle pahi. My name is Reyes DeVore. I'm from the Pueblo Hines. I am here to demand social equity, which refers to the equality of opportunities for constituents to have a say in making decisions about their environment and to have equality of access to a healthy environment. I am here to demand that you as commissioners put aside your personal political agendas, to line your pockets and to begin to think about the health and the land, which should take precedence. You continue to talk about economic development, but if you continue to damage the land, then what economy are you going to have to develop? I am here to demand tribal consent of impact to our bodies, environment, and sacred places. Chapman, you say that you are going to consider that all Pueblo Council of Governors consent and take that to heart, but yet as people come up here and talk, you continue to not pay attention to them. So I'm going to ask that you please listen to me. Washlet is my Indian name that represents the flowers along the ditches. This given name stems from my late grandmother, Washlet, which means ditch. Our names are directly and deeply rooted in connection to the land and our community's irrigation systems. Water flows through the ditches that harvest our crops. We have self-sustained ourselves through this traditional farming on the land, which we have been connected to for time memorial in the Southwest region. The proposed fracking that you are all trying to implement will directly impact not just our villages and water, but our constituents of Sandoval County. You are all making a decision to disconnect the people from their culture. You are all violating the Clean Water and Clean Air Act, as it will disrupt prior and paramount water rights to the Pueblo nations who are utilizing that surface water for irrigation practices as well as cultural practices. When these pipelines burst and contaminate our water systems, what will you tell your children, their children, and your nieces and nephews? Have you guys not paid attention to the recent explosion in Socorro, which killed 12 people? Will you be able to look them in the eye and tell them that you made the wrong decision, or will you make the right choice to keep them and all of us safe? I'm asking and demanding that you table that ordinance. And I'd also like to thank all of our tribal administrators, our governors and officials for being here and speaking up on behalf of all the Pueblos, and that you guys really think about all those tribal seals that are back there. And think about all those pictures that are also in the hallway. There's pictures of all of our villages and those missions that have been built. We have already been, and people who have been attacked, and our existence and our identity is continuously attacked by you guys not paying attention and listening to us. Please, we're tired of it.
Ken McDaniel.
Sir, I think you had called Mark Moe previously.
I did.
We showed the video and he never got a chance to speak.
Okay, Mr. Moe will get you next.
Evening, Commissioners. I'm Ken McDaniel. I'm from Rio Rancho. And I might seem like an unlikely protester here because, one, I'm not a deep greenie. Two, I own stock in 3 oil companies. On the other hand, I was born and raised right around a bunch of oil refineries. And I spent 5 years living in San Juan County in the middle of the oil patch. so I have some idea of what's involved. The air where I grew up was said to be the equivalent of a pack-a-day cigarette habit. My little brother was lucky enough to skip a grade in school so he could go off to college at 17 instead of 18 out in the podunk. Between Labor Day and Thanksgiving that year, he grew 4 inches and 2 more the rest of the year, after having spent several years not growing at all. When I lived in San Juan County, that area had been drilled considerably, and there were a lot of wells which had rotted out into the groundwater. So the groundwater would have maybe, in one case, 680 parts per million sulfate. 250 is the point at which most people get the runs. Okay, so you're almost 3 times that. And that's basically throughout the area. Now, if you get this on the edge of the Rio Grande aquifer, in the Albuquerque Basin aquifer, you've got a groundwater supply that nearly 1 million people depend on. What are you going to do if you screw that up? And then you got, now I'm sure AMREP will say, hey, if you don't let us drill, we're going to sue you. Well, maybe you should let them sue you, because AMREP moved 100,000 people into Rio Rancho on the representation that they were moving into a residentially zoned area. No heavy industry, nice living. There is something in the law called estoppel, meaning that if you mislead people about your intention as to exercising a right, you may not be allowed to exercise that right even though it was your right. You have forfeited it. If AMREP wanted to drill for oil, they should have done it before they built Rio Rancho. And then they could see how much they would get for that land if it was in the middle of an oil patch. The law in terms of using mineral rights is that the mineral rights owner is allowed to develop his rights, but he has to compensate the surface owners for any damage that his operations cause to them. If you put this in Rio Rancho, where you've got thousands of people in the proximity of the well, as a practical matter, how do you do that? How do you distribute compensation to these people for the diminution of their property values, the diminution of their health? You can't. And then you have AMREP subcontracting this to some mom and pop operation that probably doesn't have $1 million capitalization, so that if they screw it up, they go bankrupt. And AMREP is not any money. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel.
My name is Mark Mull. I live on the other side of the mountain in the far southeastern corner of Sandoval County. I would like to thank the commissioners for allowing all of us to speak and to be heard on what we believe is a very significant subject, because water is going to be becoming more and more important to us as our lives go on. I'm here to speak about the New Mexico Tech study again. I hope that you realize that 90% of the $60,000 is going toward searching for potential drilling locations for gas companies, and less than 10% of that money is going to look at the protection of our aquifers or the impact of drilling and fracking on our aquifers. I believe that this study also has, and heard earlier this evening, an end date of May of this year. I think it is a poor use of the county's money to spend $60,000 on a study and then make a decision prior to even seeing and studying and understanding what's in that report. I would urge you to delay voting on this ordinance until after you have at least considered a $60,000 study that the county paid for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Melissa So? No?
Excuse me.
Matt?
Police
Real
officer.
quickly, I would like to put this in for public record. It's a press release on behalf of Public Action Alliance.
Okay, thank you. Matt? Eldringhoff?
I'm impressed, Mr. Chapman. You got my last name right. Thank you. Mr. Chapman, I asked for the Commission's indulgence to be able to speak on a matter that was originally meant for the open comment section. Thank you. This will be directed at Mr. Block. Mr. Block, I'm formally notifying you of multiple complaints being filed against you with the OSC, Office of Special Counsel of the United States Federal Government. First complaint entails you, Mr. Block, failing to follow at least the intended spirit of the Hatch Act during the 2016 election cycle. As a caveat, I'm fully aware, Mr. Block, of the fact an original complaint was filed against you with the New Mexico Attorney General's office. And I might add that an additional complaint is going to be filed against that office for them not following up in a timely fashion. Specifically, you failed in your duties as a retiring field-grade officer in the United States Air Force in regards to DoD Directive 1344.10, political activities by members of the United States Armed Forces. You failed to provide the County Election Board with said document to ensure their understanding of your intent to retire within 278 framework prescribed in the above directive. You failed to provide the county with a point of contact for your chain of command to reinforce said intent to retire. Upon further investigation, Mr. Block, unlike your tale of asking the county if they needed documentation in response of, quote, actually I'm paraphrasing this, if it is okay with the United States Air Force, it's okay with us. The following actually took place. Mr. Block, I'm not going to give the name of the individual, the county official that I received this information from, though I will put that person's name in the official complaint.
Sure.
Point 1, the county did ask you. Point 2, you, quote, threw a fit, unquote. Point 3, you became verbally abusive to the county officials present. Point 4, you refused on the grounds that you were concerned that, quote, Democrats would gain access to said information even though any documentation provided is by its very nature considered confidential. Point 5, you did provide documentation to the previous county attorney with the understanding that it would remain, quote, confidential, unquote, even though this action in and of itself could be construed as an attempt to circumvent elements of the Hatch Act. We did contact the current county attorney and she had no knowledge of the issue with the response of, and I quote, I represent the county commission as a whole, not individual commissioners. Second complaint entails a possible conflict of interest between your association with Booz Allen and Hamilton and their extensive work with the oil and gas industry. Notice I used the word possible. I said possible.
No, you're doing just fine.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Block.
Sure, keep going.
Okay.
You're out of time.
Oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. No,
Well,
go ahead,
like,
Mr. Block.
I would like, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Commissioner Block.
If the fine gentleman there is done, I would really like to easily refute this. So first of all, it's not the Hatch Act, because as a active duty Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, which I was, I don't come under the Hatch Act because that's for federal employees, and military is not federal employees, so you have that wrong.
Well, I did mention the DoD directives.
And now, but you had the Hatch Act wrong, so that's one thing.
Okay.
You did quote the DoD thing correctly. What you don't know is the whole story, is that I went through numerous lawyers at Kirtland Air Force Base and the Secretary of the Air Force level. I got that letter. Let me finish. I asked the county attorney at the time, Mr. Trujillo, if it was required for any candidate running for office in Sandoval County to provide that letter. He said no. So I didn't provide the letter. So I met the requirement of residency, and I met the requirement of the DoD
regulation you cited because I had permission from the Secretary of the Air Force. Second, that letter I received in February of 2016. I filed on March 8th of 2016.
Yes, sir.
The election was November 8th of 2016.
Yes, sir.
Not one time was I asked to provide that letter between March and November of 2016. I'm elected December 30th, 2016. I'm sworn in. March of this year, I received an email from, and I think I have this because, once again, your facts are completely wrong. And it was filed to the Secretary of State's office by a Mark Elliston, who, by the way, was chair of the Democratic Party.
Yes, sir.
Right?
I'm aware.
Okay, well, that's one thing you got right.
Oh, well, thank you.
So, well, if you're going to be nasty,
I'm
and
not
just
being
not be,
nasty, sir.
yeah, you are.
No, I'm not.
Yes,
being
you are.
nasty, sir.
I'm going to finish my. I'm finishing.
Go ahead, sir.
I'm finishing.
Go ahead.
Sit there, please.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, because I'm just tired of this. Because you got nothing.
Sir, you are a 22-year veteran of the United States Air Force, sir.
Thank you.
Your extensive managerial experience, your extensive leadership experience, and yet you have the hubris to think that you got a letter from the United States Air Force and you thought that you just didn't have to turn it in?
I asked, sir, and here's why. I also, when this was under investigation for the Attorney General, and the Secretary of State said, no, we're not touching it, it's not required, they turned it over to the Attorney General's office. I got a call from the Attorney General's office. Actually, I called them first, and I said, do you need this letter? It was offered to them. And they said, no. We don't need it because we're investigating. If we need it, we'll ask. So, the county clerk asked me for the letter. The previous county attorney, Natalia Downing, I gave it to her, and I said, what do you want me to do with this? She said, don't give it to anybody because it's an investigation unless they ask for it. That was it. So, you need to understand the rules and the timeline, which you don't. But I have that letter. If you want to see the letter, I'll give you the letter.
Sir, this is all I'm asking, frankly. And this is
And that's for my personal private employment, which
Sir,
I have,
sir.
which, by the way, no, I'm not going to, I'm not done with you.
No, please, by all means.
So I've never once have talked about my personal employment, and I don't appreciate you bringing it up either, because I have a non-disclosure agreement with my firm, and my firm does business here in Albuquerque, not with oil and gas. They do it with the Air Force Base on certain things that are not related to oil and gas that I'm not going to talk about here in an open forum.
Sir, that's why I use the word possible. I'm fully aware of the fact that you work in a separate division if I had the time to finish with that statement. My point is this, hubris. Do you understand the concept of hubris, sir?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to indulge in this anymore.
Okay,
Obviously, let's wrap it up, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Make your complaint. I got the letter. Whatever you want, I will give it to you. I've offered it to everybody.
Move on.
Thank you.
Lori Perk. How about Sheldon Tenorio?
Lori.
Are you telling me you have a signed statement from Lori?
Oh, I am Lori.
You are Lori. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I apologize. I wasn't sure. Go right ahead. I'm sorry. It's late.
I know it is. Commissioner Chapman, I want to ask you personally, this assessment that you're waiting on from the tech, you can't hear me?
You gotta get close.
Okay.
There you go.
Oh, I hate myself. Okay, so the assessment that you're kind of waiting on could potentially tell you essentially how much money that the companies will be making from passing this ordinance, if you pass this ordinance. But I feel like you're willing to sacrifice people's lives and the respective tribal leaders on a hunch that the county might be funding from this, because you're not waiting on the assessment. So
You're asking me?
I'm asking that if you can just wait until you're more informed on that aspect at least. if you could please motion to table this ordinance. And then Commissioner Block?
Yes, ma'am? Yes, ma'am?
Okay. So
I'm sorry, I was like looking for a letter, I was a little bit upset, but go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
That's okay, I gotta deal with people like that. It's okay.
And we can put you on the spot again.
Sure.
So, if you, I was really, just really distraught when you brought up, you don't know what you're voting on kind of thing.
You're talking tonight,
Yes,
based on 11 Alpha and Bravo?
yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I felt that it's your job, the agenda was up at least 72 hours before, and we all had an opportunity to read it.
You know what, you're gonna have to speak up. I'm gonna move on
Okay,
here.
sorry. So the agenda was up 72 hours before, and we all had an opportunity to read it, and
Right.
yet you approved it, the minutes prior from November, you approved the minutes from October, you approved the minutes of September, you approved the agenda before we even started the meeting, and it just showed to me that you were not really concerned about this meeting at all, and I really felt disheartened about that.
I'm sorry.
And I felt disheartened about that.
Okay, can I ask you a question? So we all approved the consent of the agenda, except tonight I did not approve of the consent of the agenda based on 11 Alpha and Bravo. That's how the vote went tonight. As for the other county commission meetings prior to this, I think we have all unanimously approved consent to the agenda before every county commission. So can you just explain the question again?
Well, what about when you said, isn't this what happened in September? Isn't this what happened in the last meeting? We have minutes, and you approved those minutes.
That was related to an email that I read from Mr. Springfield.
The September portion or
The
the
September
November?
21st and the November one
Okay.
was an email that I read from Mr. Springfield that I was upset about because the sound was different in the ordinances, and I didn't like how that was presented, and I didn't like how it was on the agenda tonight. So that's why I voted no for the consent of the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So I'm gonna ask if you can please motion to table this ordinance because you yourself, and I'm sure others, feel uninformed,
I feel what?
ill-informed.
Ill-informed?
Thank you, that's all.
No, I would say misinformed. But I'm with you.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
All right, thank you, Lori.